Thank you so much. What an amazing room. Just want to get a sense of the people in the room. Any students in the room, current students, K through 12, college, MBA students? Outstanding, outstanding. Any of their teachers in the room? Any educators in the room? All right, those are my favorite people. You'll learn about that in a little bit. My mother's was a 50-year teacher in DC public schools, so I know where it starts and ends, and that is with our teachers. Any private sector leaders in the room? Outstanding. I see a number of my favorite companies here. And then elected officials, public servants in the room. Nonprofit folks in the room. The chamber, thank you so much. We have everybody in the room. Everybody in the room that we need to make a difference. All right, that's what I want to begin with. Todd, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for everything you're doing in your own right to address diversity, both in Greenville, in the state of North Carolina, and in the nation. I'd also like to thank Dr. Nika White, Carlos Phillips, and Dr. Brenda Timms and the Chamber for bringing us together for this extraordinary event. I think as somebody who's traveled throughout this country and internationally, addressing the issue of diversity, it cannot go without being said that the initiative and the drive that it takes to have this discussion at this point requires immense leadership and immense foresight, and I'd like everybody to give the Chamber a round of applause for bringing us together for this event. So I have a few slides I want to share with you today. I want to talk a little bit about my story. I want to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at MLT, and also about belonging. You know, a number of us are familiar with diversity and inclusion. As a matter of fact, 80 years ago, as we came out of the civil rights era and we emerged into the era of affirmative action, which was largely a legal and compliance-driven issue, we started thinking about how do we have a more inclusive society? How do we bring other people to the table? But that was largely, again, legal and compliance-driven. And then, really, for 30 years, we kind of stayed in the same place. My father, who, after serving in the military, and then went to the Library of Congress, dealt with affirmative action in the federal government for almost the entirety of his post-military service. And so that became the way that we thought about addressing diversity and inclusion. And then in the late 90s and the early 2000s, we started to address, diversity and inclusion. How do we bring more people to the table? How do we include them? But one of the things that we'll talk about today is what's an emerging concept in this space right now, and it's belonging, right? Belonging, if for those psychologists in the table, any psychologists in the room, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That first psychological need is belonging, right? And that is the sense, and there's some people that we'll talk about here in a second, but it is the sense that you are appreciated where you are and that you can be most impactful and be your authentic self. So all right, the way that we talk about belonging, and Pat Waters, who's the Chief Human Resource Officer at LinkedIn, is one of the leading specialists in this area. And LinkedIn is really, people think about it as a tech company, but it's really a people company. Can everybody read up there? What does it say? Essential to the team, all right? So the question that we find ourselves asking ourselves all the time is, do I belong? All right? Is there anybody in the room that has ever questioned whether they belong in any environment, just by a show of hands? All right? It is impossible to be your best self when you question your sense of belonging. It is impossible to have your best team when your team is questioning their sense of belonging. And so, what does this have to do with diversity and inclusion? For too long, people of underrepresented minorities, women, right? People from different backgrounds, religious, sexual orientations, vets that are coming back into the country from a different environment, question whether or not they belong, whether it's in the workplace, in the school system, in the public service, the public or private sector. That disconnect does not allow us to function at optimal capacity. It doesn't allow us as the city of Greenville, the state of North or South Carolina, or the country of the United States. We're a $19 trillion GDP country. And John showed you, 30% of the country is underrepresented minority. But if those people, right, aren't operating with a sense of belonging and at their greatest capacity, then we're operating in a suboptimal way, right? It is almost not patriotic for us not to think about how do we give everybody an increased sense of belonging. So my story. There we go. These people. They look a little bit like me. I love these pictures. My father, these pictures were taken about 2 years apart of each other. I think my father, that was 1964. He had recently been commissioned in the United States Navy. My mother, who Todd talked about, I'll tell the story now, I'll finish it. This was, I think, a picture from when she was teaching. She had just moved to DC. This is 1966. And this is the root of who I am. This is the root of who most of us are, right? Our parents, our brothers and sisters, for those of us that have them, oftentimes are our first influence in terms of who we are, what our values are, and what that sense of belonging is for us, all right? In my family, my mother was born in Durham, North Carolina in 1935. She was born to two parents who had less than a sixth grade education. They worked for Liggett & Miles cigarette factory, which most people at the time in North Carolina worked for. This is tobacco industry. This is, 70, 80 years ago. And that's how they put food on the table. They sent my mother, they sent her brother and her sister all to college. My mother completed her undergrad, her master's, and was a career teacher because she felt her biggest impact, her sense of belonging was in the classroom. My father, a different story. 1929 in Canton, Mississippi. My father was a sharecropper, right? When he was 15 years old, he lied about his age and enlisted in the Navy in 1945. Right? We didn't know this till he died, and he had two birth certificates, one from the state of Mississippi and one from the Department of Defense. All right? My father completed his undergrad, his master's, his PhD, served 28 years in the United States Navy, and then served over 20 years at the Library of Congress until he died. Okay? He skipped 3 generations in one lifetime. 3 generations in one lifetime. From picking cotton, right, to running a unit of over 60 people at the Library of Congress. So what do you think my parents valued? Education. That is absolutely it. Todd talked about my educational path. Some of that was choice, but at least 2 of those degrees were, you need to go back to school, okay? So then, what does this mean for my life, right? At MLT, part of what we talk about for underrepresented minority folks is, how do you have an advocate in the workplace, right? For many top-performing minorities and for top-performing people in general, right? We find that the playbook for success in school, for students out there, how do you get an A? You study, right? It's like swimming in a pool, in a lap pool. The wall's 50 meters ahead of you. You put your head down, you stroke, you study, you touch the line before somebody else, and you get an A. You get enough A's. One of these great companies out here is going to give you an opportunity to work for them. But the reality is that once you start that job, for our people in here that are early career, mid-career, and senior leaders, right, we recognize that the playbook for success in the workplace is materially different, right? Your performance and your value is largely driven by how other people feel you're bringing value to the table, right? There is no test. You don't know if it's a test or a quiz. You don't know who's your teacher and who's your colleague, who's your student, who's your TA, okay? So that sense of belonging, right, becomes even more paramount because the anxiety, right, the uncertainty of the workplace creates more volatility for you. So if you feel that you belong, if you feel that you're valued, if you feel that your work will be representative of the value that you're bringing to the organization, you will be rewarded as such, not only will you feel more comfortable, you will be more productive. So I'll run through my life here. All right, that first picture, that's me, my best friend. We went to school from first grade through college together. That's graduation from Morehouse College. After I left Morehouse, and I'll give the quick script here, I finished Georgia Tech, started as an engineer at IBM. All right? You see up there, there are a couple meaningful points in my life. The world changed September 11th, 2001. I remember where I was. I was sitting in Durham, North Carolina. I was making a flight reservation. This is before people did stuff on the internet, right? I'm calling AirTran, which doesn't really exist anymore. And I'm trying to get a flight from Durham, North Carolina to DC. My best friend calls me. He goes, dude, are you in front of a television? You got to check out what's happening. All right? All of these are connected. At IBM, after 9/11, I then started working on one of the largest projects at IBM, which was rebuilding the internet infrastructure for the New York Board of Education. Over 1 million students in New York's public city schools. So as a person that didn't like to fly a lot anyway, 5 months after this tragedy, I headed to New York. And every week for 7 months, I was driving back and forth and taking the train back and forth between New York City and Durham, North Carolina, because I was scared to get on the plane. All right? My wife there, in between those 7 months, I married my wife, who went to Spelman College, who was my college sweetheart. I was her math tutor. So I guess it worked out for me somehow, right, Todd? We got married, fast forward, went to Duke for business school. One of the reasons I went there is my favorite basketball team. I think the folks here in South Carolina, though, you guys did pretty well against them this year, right? Oh, all right. Another story for another day, but a great story about diversity, inclusion, and belonging with your Gamecocks down in South Carolina. A great, great story, and you all should think about that. So finished up there. My mom, that's graduation from Fuqua. And then I went to Wall Street. I was an engineer. I went to Wall Street. I started off at Bank of America in New York City, and then we moved down to North Carolina. And so here's a great story that Todd was sharing. So my mother, who you saw in the other picture, had some great friends, great sense of belonging growing up. One of her friends, who I call my Aunt Jeannie, was the first black female state senator in the state of North Carolina at the state legislature. This was my mom's friend. She lived with my mom when her parents died. They went to college together. This was a lifelong friend of hers. Probably the most painful day in my mother's life at that point was when she passed. And that was in March of 2006. Here's a crazy story. This is what happens in the world. We go to the funeral in North Carolina. I'm reading a copy. It's the April 2000 version of Black Enterprise. Now, I am a telecom analyst covering telecom stocks at Bank of America. I flew down to go to the funeral with my mother, and I opened the magazine, and there's a gentleman, Isaac Green, who's a portfolio manager at Piedmont Investment Advisors, and he's in there talking about AT&T. And I'm thinking, wow. And I look up, and we're both there at the gate at Southwest, leaving North Carolina, and the guy is sitting right here, just like you are. Now, I talk to hedge funds, I talk to pension funds, I talk to a ton of clients, but I've never had a guy in a magazine that close to me. Right? Here's the thing. Isaac is a guy like me. He's a Duke grad, Columbia Business School, a black man who's running a multi-billion-dollar portfolio that manages money for the state of North Carolina, New York Teachers Common Fund, Chicago, Police and Fire. And he's sitting that close. And my mom says, well, why don't you go talk to him? And I'm thinking, that could be uncomfortable. But I do, right? I do. And so that is Kenny Lewis, his frat brother. We're all frat brothers. Any Omegas in here? Oh, okay. All right. So here's the story. I'm at Bank of America. Times are getting tough. My wife's getting ready to start a residency, and she's applying back to UNC. Isaac and I talk for a few months. He becomes a client. Later, as 2007 starts falling apart, Bank of America gets tight, and I decide, I want to do something else. I had a firm that wanted to hire me. You may have heard of it, Bear Stearns. right? I think I may have had the last offer ever granted by Bear Stearns. It was dated March 8th, 2008. The firm didn't exist a week later, okay? But anyway, I make the decision. I decide to go to work for Isaac off of seeing his picture in a magazine and having the opportunity to meet him. It was a great experience. I could never imagine being another place as we go through what we see there, right? About 7 years later, another mid-September tragedy. The market fell apart. Anybody remember where they were September 15th, 2008, when Lehman went away? Right, I do. I was sitting at a Citicorp investment conference in New York City, and people's pagers, not pagers, but cell phones just started going off. Right? This is about 6 months after Bear Stearns, after that last offer letter that I got from a company that no longer exists. Right? The story I'm building here is you got to start thinking about your networks. Think about how they affect your life. Okay? A couple of more things happened. Somewhere along the way, a couple of kids moved into our house and started eating up all of our food. They started up eating all of our food, and then we moved home. We moved back to D.C. I'm born and raised in Hillcrest Heights, Maryland, right in the shadow of Washington, D.C. My wife is from Silver Spring. It was a great opportunity for us to move home. And then this last picture, something happened, right? Something happened to me. So I moved, a headhunter called me. Any headhunters in the room? Good. All right, I'm going to talk bad about them. All right. When a headhunter proactively calls you, be careful. Because they're going to give you an opportunity that you cannot turn down. That doesn't mean you should not turn it down, okay? I'll say that. Always network, always have the conversations. But when a headhunter calls you, remember, they're looking to get something out of it too. Call me with this great opportunity, a ton of money, leading my own team at a regulatory and policy shop in DC, where I was going to cover tech, media, and telecom, lead the practice in tech, media, and telecom. And I did. And I started covering a bunch of cool stocks. I started looking at what's going on with Spectrum and what's going on with performance royalty rights at companies like Pandora. Anybody have Pandora media on their phone? All right. I was the #1 Pandora analyst in the entire country. Right? I made a ton of money and notoriety off of covering that stock. All right. That was my one. Now, I blew a ton of others, but that was the one that I was good at. So December 2012, I've been there for a couple of years. I go play basketball every Thanksgiving with my buddies, and I started having some pain in my calf. And I thought, oh man, I'm getting old. I probably pulled a muscle. And I walk around for about a week with this. And then my wife's like, look, you're limping around here. Now I'm limping for different reasons, right? But you're limping around here. You look terrible. Here, come here. And so she gives it a little massage, and she's like, I don't know if I really want to do this. It sounds crazy. This could be like, a blood clot, all right? But she's saying it in jest, but she's a physician, right? Always listen to your mother, always listen to your wife. When they don't agree, leave the room, okay? So it turns out that I'm writing a report on Pandora. I'm upgrading the stock. The company has come out. They cut guidance by 20% because if you remember, at the end of 2012, right, this is right after Obama's after he's won the election for the second time. What happens in D.C.? What's the answer? Nothing. Nothing happens. Complete gridlock, right? The House, the Senate, the President, the White House, nobody can get along. Nothing's happening. The government's about to shut down. Sequestration, right? And so a lot of companies, for those companies in the room, you may remember this, they say, well, if the government shuts down, that's going to have negative impacts on what's going to happen in the rest of the private sector. And so Pandora thought that was going to happen too. They cut their guidance. The stock fell by 20% in one day and 10% the next day. But my firm and the folks I worked with said, you know what? We'll figure it out. We will not have one day where the market's open and the government will be shut down. If you remember, on a Sunday night, there was a kind of 11th hour deal that avoided the sequestration. All right? But let's get back to this blood clot, which we didn't know at the time, right? So I thought it was a cramp. The next morning I wake up, I'm coughing, I'll tell you, all that math and science doesn't mean anything when you think you know everything, right? So I figure with all of that education, I can WebMD something and figure it out. So I've diagnosed myself. I have walking pneumonia. Okay? I'm in my office. I tell my associate, I said, don't come in here. I got pneumonia. I'll send you a G-chat, right? I'll send you an instant message. She's like, oh, you're kind of crazy, okay? So I go for another week, and every time I breathe, it feels like somebody's stabbing me in the chest. So finally, it's Friday. We're done. We had a good week. We had made some calls about this stock. I was doing a lot of research and thinking about, all right, what can we really do? Is this stock really undervalued? Is this an opportunity for my clients to make, a ton of money? Because that's what I'm thinking about. And I'm working in a silo, right? Do I feel like I belong to the firm? No, what I know is that my clients value what I say, but I'm working away from those pictures that you saw on the last slide. My parents didn't know what investment banking was. They were teachers. They were educators, okay? They didn't think about the world in that way. So long story short, I walk into Washington Hospital Center emergency room about 6 o'clock. My wife and I had an argument, ironically enough, in the parking lot of a church about who was going to take me to the hospital. And our daughter had a dance recital for the Nutcracker. And I said, I don't need you driving me. I'm going to go to the emergency room. I'm going to get some antibiotics because I have WebMD, but I'm talking to a physician, right? I'm talking to a physician. I said, I'll be out. I don't want to wait on you to come pick me up. I get there, I walk in, do not telegraph when you go to the emergency room. Do not telegraph to the triage nurse what's wrong with you, okay? It's a horrible thing. I go in, she goes, well, what's wrong? I said, I think I got pneumonia. I got a pain in my chest. They take an x-ray. Long story short, they see some inflammation. They give me a Z-Pak, which is a little antibiotic. I'm waiting to get discharged. I hear this grumbling, and you saw my wife. She's a little bitty, woman, but a lot of fight, right? I hear this person coming through saying, get your hands off me. I am licensed and privileged in this hospital. And a big brother, about bigger than me, is walking behind her saying, miss, you can't go back there. Right? He's a security in the emergency room. She goes straight into the head of the ambulatory care. She goes, what did they say about your leg? I said, I told you it's pneumonia. She goes, did you tell them about your leg? I said, no, it's my chest. She walks into the office. The guy comes back out 5 minutes later. He says, how come you didn't tell me about your leg? Long story short, they take me to do a CT scan. I've got 3 blood clots in my chest. All right, this is the picture here. Now, this picture, which is very funny, is me texting my trader about the upgrade note that I've written on Pandora. All right, you want to see the note? Uh-oh, let's see. Here we go. That's the note. That's the top part of my note. At the bottom is what the stock did. It was a heck of a call. The stock was $7.97 when I upgraded it. Over the next year, it went almost up to 40. That's the phone. Well, not the exact phone, but a picture of the iPhone 4 that I was typing on. Here's the big story for me and about this story. That note is sitting in a landfill somewhere. The people that I sent it to, I haven't talked to them in years. That phone is 3 generations old. My son won't even use that phone now, okay? You see what the stock did? I made people a ton of money for a year. Hopefully they sold it at the top, but the stock's $10 and change now. All right? Impact, belonging, feeling that you're making, that your work matters. How much did I feel? 0. Okay? So, anybody know Plato, right? An unexamined life is not worth living. Life is funny. It will give you these opportunities, right? It will give you these opportunities to examine your life, to think critically about your path and the direction that you're doing, right? This is what your career is. Your career is part of your life. You're thinking about a path. You're thinking about a direction that you're going to take. Life will provide windows for you to do it, but it's better if you can just do it proactively yourself before you end up in a hospital bed, okay? This picture I love, all right? And, there's a number of pictures like this, but when I was an engineer, when I was in investments, I hated vacation. I was all about my work. I coached my son's basketball team, and that was about it, all right? I was myopically focused on the job that I'm doing. But we have elected officials, we have public sector, we have private sector, we have education, we have everybody in this room that it takes to make a difference. But if you're not meeting all of these different people and networking and engaging and developing your sense of belonging in this room, then you're going to limit your ability to impact. I started at MLT because I had folks like that interned actually with Ken's son Marshall, that were in MLT and did the program. I had fellows and friends that I wrote recommendations for them to go to business school, and they went through the MLT program. And so I started to expand my sphere of understanding and influence in my life. And it's incredible where that thing will lead you. It led me to apply for a program with an organization called Echoing Green. They have a program called Direct Impact, which is for people that want to develop board leadership skills around board governance. Anybody know where this is? Any guess? Kathmandu, Nepal. I'm sitting in the Kaveri district. So they had a massive earthquake there in 2005. 800,000 homes destroyed, only 5% of them have been rebuilt. There's a great organization there that is part of this program. I went to visit to see the work they were doing and figure out how we can impact them. I felt like I belonged there. All right? I felt like I belonged here. But sitting in the cube, writing the investment note to upgrade a stock, which is going to fall back down, none of those people are going to be your friends. None of those people are going to call you. The phone you write them on will be obsolete in 18 months because Apple is a machine. Okay? That is not the sense of belonging. So I encourage everybody to expand their lives. So quickly, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at MLT. Right? Your story is all of our stories. When we think about our pathways, right, whether you're just coming into the workplace, graduating school, or you're a senior leader, right? When you're on this mountain, just like those mountains in Nepal, right? You got to start thinking about, how do I get to the next peak? And what I can tell you is that line is not going to be a straight path. Again, this is important for everybody, right? But as we think about multicultural leadership, right? There are many of us in the room, there are many of us in our communities that haven't been getting this lesson. Mom or dad was not working at a private sector organization, right? They weren't a CEO or COO of an organization like that, right? They weren't working in public sector. They weren't an elected official. So the dinner time conversations were not about this, right? It was about do your math, right? Finish your spelling words, and finish your report. And that was my life. That's what my parents cared about. Retention and promotion. We always need to be thinking about, in our job, are we happy where we are? Are we fulfilled where we are, right? And what is it going to take to get us to that next level? And then for the young people to the more senior people, as you move from analytical skills and development to behavioral skills and development that are needed for leadership, it's important to really understand where you get those from and what they are. For everybody in here at MLT, this is our secret sauce, right? Every fellow, the 6,000 fellows that have come through our organization, undergrads, MBAs, experienced hires, and senior leaders, all work from the same framework. John Rice, who you saw earlier, John played basketball at Yale. He worked for the NBA for a number of years. He almost fired me because I hit a jumper on him one time. But the point here is that much like professional athletes, right, whose talent is only fully optimized when they have the right system and the right coach, it's the same for professional talent. You will be your best when you have the right sense of understanding about what it takes to succeed in your environment and where you have somebody that's helping you do that. And so, personal clarity, we talk about it in terms of 4 steps. What are your passions? What are your gifts? What are your detractors, right? These are not weaknesses. Detractors are different. Are you chronically late? Do you not pay attention to detail? There are things that detract away from the positive things that you have. And then what are your constraints? Folks that are married, folks that have kids, folks that have physical ailments, people that have parents to take care of. We have to understand all of these things in order to develop and maximize our potential and increase our sense of belonging. And then building that roadmap, right? Working with a coach, working with a trusted advisor to get to where you want to be. And again, you guys already have the last one, Look at this room. Everybody in this room is part of your support network, or they should be. If you're a banker, if you're a lawyer like Todd knows more than lawyers. You got to. First of all, they're tough people, right? No, but really, we've got to expand our realm and our network, and that support network is best when you have people from all different sectors in it that can help you understand what the bar for success looks like. This is one of the elements that we talk a lot about. How many people in here have been in the workplace 10 years, 15 years? 10 to 15 years. How many people have ever felt that their career is stalling a little bit and they don't know why? Y'all saw me, I was on the hospital bed. That is more than a stall. That is a hard stop, okay? That is a hard stop. Reflective leadership, right? It is the concept of literally understanding how people see you and using that information to determine how you communicate strategies to lead them. If you are a leader, if you manage one single person, reflective leadership is the most important thing you can incorporate into your life. Right? Because now it requires you to literally put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Active listening. It means you have to listen as hard as you speak. Okay? Because you need to understand how people see you. You know, if all of you told me how you see me up here today, I would be more impactful in helping you and communicating the things that I need to communicate to you. All right? So reflective leadership becomes incredibly important. Feedback, learning how to take feedback, learning how to give feedback, right? Understanding what your perception is versus how you're being received. And all of these things start driving trust and credibility, which we know are the most important things to leadership. It doesn't matter whether you're black, you're white, you're Hispanic, you're male, female, you're gay, you're straight. If you're trusted and you're credible with a sense of empathy and a sense of humility, you will be a leader. That's it. It's that easy. But you can't just read it in a book. You got to live it, right? You got to find where it is that it resonates most authentically for you. And when you do that, you're found your sense of belonging. And when you find that sense of belonging, you'll get actions and results. And not only will you get them, for my teachers in the room, when you are teaching your best, not only are you teaching your best, but your students are learning the best, right? Again, it comes back to teachers for me. That's why I started with my parents. Everything for me starts with them, right? For teachers, when you teach the best, when you understand how your students see you, and you are able to adjust your teaching method to get the most out of them, that's where you're executing at the highest level. And for the people in the private sector, that's why we can learn the most from educators and teachers, because they communicate for a living. And that's what we all are trying to do, right? Whether we're communicating to maximize shareholder value, we're communicating for the social good of people, or we're communicating to educate people, it's all about communication. Leaders. So this is the tough part. Any CEOs in the room? Carlos? Any people, CEO, hands higher, please. Outstanding. All right, you are leaders, you are culture drivers. You determine what that sense of belonging is on a systematic basis for your organization. And so the question we get a ton at MLT is, you know, and I'll generalize here. I am a white man. How can I make people of color? How can I make women? How can I make people of a different religion or sexual orientation feel a sense of belonging? How can I move the needle? I want to be a champion for diversity. How can I move the needle? Well, there are 4 kind of guidelines that we provide at MLT, and I'll lay them out here. But then there's a deeper element, which I think is very personal. You got to build a critical mass, and you can't be afraid to do it. What is a critical mass? A critical mass is where Marcus Shaw is a senior director at MLT, and I leave, and you don't bat an eye because you got somebody else in the pipeline that's a diverse candidate. It doesn't have to be another black man. It could be a Latino woman. It could be a gay white guy. It could be whoever you want. But it's somebody else that is additive to the diversity equation. That's how you know when you're critical mass, where you have a pipeline of diverse candidates that are waiting in the wings for succession planning. Strategic rigor. This is my favorite part of this. Diversity and inclusion is arguably your most, well, talent, right? Talent is your most important part of your organization. Artificial intelligence, we see it every day in the newspaper. Wall Street Journal runs an article about the machines are taking over every day, right? But people are responsible for doing everything. It's the most important asset class that we have in the world, human beings. It's not stocks, it's not bonds, it's not, engineering tools, it's people. Okay? So if your company wants to be successful, you have to address people and diversity of those assets with the same rigor that you address your core business. If you're a utility, you have to address diversity with the same rigor that you're provisioning energy or gas to your constituency. If you're an automaker, you got to address the human capital situation and diversity and inclusion with the same rigor that you develop resources to put out the best and brightest automobiles. Okay? You've got to commit to strategic rigor. You've got to, and we see it in sports, where you see people that are high performers early on, you've got to make sure that you're advancing them, right? It truly needs to be a meritocracy. Best people need to be on best teams so that they can become leaders and then find the next group of best people and develop the next group of best people to work on best teams. And it goes on and on and on. All right? We've got to remove any barriers that prevent us from having teams with the best people from diverse backgrounds. And then the last one, results and accountability. This is for the CEOs in the room. Your compensation has to have some element of being your success or failure in diversity, inclusion, and human capital. I'll tell you the honest truth. I work with over 100 companies. Only about 30% of them have flow-throughs in terms of diversity and inclusion impacting executive compensation. But those are the companies that are being the most progressive and are leading the way. And so, whatever you measure, right, that's all that you can be held against. You got to measure, develop some metrics for success, and then you have to execute against them. And if you win, you get paid. If you don't, you don't. That's it. Okay? I want to come back to why this is so important, because Nika has talked about this, but behind belonging is the motivation for it. And this can't just be an accident. It has to be intentional. Right? For the leaders in the room, this has to be intentional. For the students, early, mid-career people in the room, that playbook has to be intentional. You have to think about what your personal clarity is, right? Think about passion, your gifts, your detractors, your constraints. You have to seek out the bar for high performance at your company. What does it look like? What do high performers look like? What are their skills? What are their relationships? What are their accomplishments? Not where did they go to school or what did they major in. What are they good at? Who do they know? And what have they done? And that is where we find our sense of belonging. It's got to be iterative, it's got to be intentional, and it's got to be something that we're committed to no matter what we look like. MLT is focused on this. And if you have any questions or you're interested in the organization, my email is there, the URL for our website is there. Please take a look. If you think you're a company that wants to, advance your strategy and think about your path for your diversity strategy. If you're a student or mid-career professional that is thinking, how do I be intentional about these steps of my career? Take a look. Feel free to give me an email. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, and God bless. Questions? So I think we have a few minutes here, about 6 minutes or so, for questions. Does anybody moved? Move to action? Anybody learn anything fun? Anybody wonder how two such good-looking people made me? If you have questions, oh yes, we have a microphone here and a microphone here.
Is it on? Yes. Hi, how are you doing?
Excellent.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sending you some Coleman love, member of DST. Are you the best sorority? Just want to put that out there. I got some sorors in the audience. But I think that you address some really key concepts within the workforce. So my question comes in when we're thinking about like our current climate, our political climate, so many different identities that I possess, right? And so my question to you is, what role do you believe intersectionality plays when we're thinking of addressing complex social issues and social justice for all in the workplace?
Wow, that is that's a doozy right off the bat.
My bad.
I should have known.
You have all these degrees. I had to get you, you know?
Yeah. So intersectionality, is a critical word that we use today, and it's about, how can we leverage the resources that we're putting towards, any initiative that we're trying to do. So for instance, in the diversity and inclusion, it's what can you take from kind of the race and ethnicity equation, and how can you use that to leverage against, the gender equation, right? We see this in Silicon Valley where, they've had more success recently with gender diversity, but still struggle mightily with ethnic diversity. I think what we've seen is that using the voice and building coalitions amongst different organizations is obviously the most successful path for being impactful for a couple of reasons. Number one, you get best practices. Number two, you're able to actually leverage real resources and time. And number three, you're forming a bigger coalition so that when you're going to organizations, and for those organizations out here that are in the private sector and may have ERGs, where you may have a black workers organization and a Hispanic workers organization, a women's organization, you are more powerful when you move to leadership and saying, we want to be more intentional about the way we think about diversity, and that will benefit everybody. So I think that, I'm actually on my way this evening to a board meeting at Fuqua at Duke, and the same question comes up in the business school about, how does the Black and Latin student organization leverage the intersectionality with the women's organization and with some of the religious organizations, and you've got to put it together. It's like a business 101, right? You've got to find synergies in order to drive the most value. So does that answer? That was a much smarter question than I am.
I want to give them a chance. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll tip it. Hi there. So something I've really loved about the whole theme of this luncheon and what you presented is this theme of you matter.
Yep.
And I think all of us sitting here, we're in this room because we understand that and buy in and believe in it. And my question is about how we take this back and implement it in our lives and our workplaces, especially when we look at historically excluded employees, and what are some practices that our organizations can have in place, like allies, mentors, structures, to ensure that historically excluded employees that we're giving these opportunities to participate in meaningful, authentic assignments, initiatives.
So another great question. From the business standpoint, and I'll give you an anecdote about one of the things that we saw was most powerful in terms of people who get it and are high performers in the workplace and people who don't. It's not your manager, it's not your division or your role. The formation of informal networks with people that are meeting the bar. It is, I see, what's your name?
Lori.
Lori. I see Lori. We work together. Lori is getting it. She is a high performer. If I have 3 conversations with you a year, and they can be about anything because naturally they're going to be about work. Work is going to creep into it. What are your skills? What are your relationships? What are your accomplishments? 3 conversations about that with you a year increases my probability of knowing the bar and becoming a high performer by 70%. All right, here it is, affiliation. Companies that want to succeed need to de-risk the affiliation proposition for their employees. Make it clear with the people that are meeting the bar for high performance. And then encourage, incentivize those people to share their stories with other people. Again, we've got to de-risk the equation, right, for meeting the bar, for sharing the bar, for understanding what high performance looks like. And so, for an organization that's looking around building, allied mentorships or opportunities like that, I would say, where you're seeing it done successfully, reward it and highlight it, and encourage the replication of that in other places.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh no, all good.
All right. I would love to get your take on the recent news from Howard University, and when you talk about leadership and being intentional, Howard University has partnered with Google to create Howard West and take their computer science students through a program there, just to fill that gap in the tech world. Yep. I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is. I think this is, and for those of you that didn't hear, so Howard University, which is a historically black college located in Washington, D.C., has partnered with Google to create a campus out in Silicon Valley. And the intent here is to bring some of the bright young computer science majors at Howard out to the West Coast so that they can better integrate with the culture and opportunities that exist in Silicon Valley. I am highly enthusiastic and encouraged by this, and Howard and Google both represent leadership in their respective places. They're both partners of ours, and so I think that this is an unbelievable opportunity to display to the market some innovative thinking around solving a problem. What I will say is it does not solve the problem, okay? What did we start talking about today? Belonging. You ever go to somebody's house that you really don't know and you get there and you're scared to sit on the couch and you go in the bathroom and you're like, I'm going to wait till I get home, and it's just, you're there, you're having dinner with them, the food is delicious, you exchange pleasantries, you're going to come back, they're going to come to your house, but you don't feel a sense of belonging, right? I believe that this is a step in the right direction, but I don't want us to say, wow, we got a black college with a campus in Silicon Valley. Now, numbers are going to go from 1% and 2% of black employees at a lot of these large tech companies to 10 or 20%. That's not how it happens. All right, it happens by, Nika, what's the word? Intentional. You've got to be intentional and consistent in your intentionality around this. I do believe that Google and Howard will make the best out of this opportunity, and hopefully other schools and companies will replicate. But for folks of us that are soldiers in this effort to make this country better through inclusion, right? That we believe and know that a sense of belonging has got to accompany all efforts like that.
Thank you.
One more?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation today. Now, my question is, how does leadership today?
I'm sorry.
How does the concept of inclusion affect leadership today?
Wow. All right. I thought I was going to get an easy one to walk out on. So, quite simply, and you saw it in the video, we are 30% underrepresented minorities today. Black, Latino, Native American, right? That number is probably growing every year by 1% or 2%. And by the year 2040, right, it is expected that that number will be over 50%. If you are a leader in an organization today and you are selling a widget of any kind to any consumer in this country, if you are not thinking about diversity, you will fail. Full stop. You will not be successful. All right? Organizations figured this out about, the LGBT community several years ago. I have a ton of folks that we work with on those initiatives. And if you marginalize people, if you marginalize women, you're missing half of the market. And you're missing 80% of the purchasing market. Women purchase 80% of men's clothes. Do you know that? Casual Male Group is a stock I used to cover. I know a bunch of tidbits. Right? I covered thousands of stocks. 80% of the dollars spent at Casual Male Group, which is for guys like myself that are a little big and a little tall, are spent by women. If you don't understand women, don't have women in leadership, thinking about how to market to women, don't have women, throughout the pipeline, thinking about how to market to women because they're making the decision, then you're going to fail. If you're not thinking about how to be inclusive and create a greater sense of belonging in the workplace for Black, Hispanic, Native American people, you will not be successful in leading your business. That's it. So you got to get it. It is as critical to leadership as business school and finance and accounting were 20, 30 years ago.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much again. Fantastic.